This is a document from my father's brother who had a permit to erect 2 walls. And where? Government of Palestine.
British Mandatory Palestine.
This? It's in 1940.
Habibi, so yeah, British Mandatory Palestine, as we both know.
Even further.
Let's go back to
Palestine is derived from the word Palestine, which
comes from the word Palishtim, which is a Hebrew word which means invaders, because they were Greeks who came.
What I'm trying to say is, at the end of the day, in 1947, we actually jumped to that. You can't. At the end of the day, don't expect not to be a conflict, not civilians obviously, but don't expect to not be a conflict when you force yourself into our land.
But
So they
can have a good chat.
Which
good.
which camp was? You said she was from a refugee camp. Which one?
She was living in the north. She moved
In
to
the north.
south.
She moved to the south.
She went to the UNRWA school. She was staying there. She's 89 years old. She needs special treatment.
Yeah.
She has diabetes and a lot of chronic diseases. She didn't receive good medication and good.
I'm just standing close so the mic picks you up, not so I'm like in your
and
face.
good diet. Then she died from medical complications yesterday.
So
she was presented on the CNN.
we say in Hebrew Baruch Dayan Emet and Chaim Avuchim, which basically is it's saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the true judge.
You say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
I say
This is here on CNN. You can check. Where's the camera?
The camera's there. Hold it up to the camera.
On CNN.
And for me, this is the tragedy of war. For every Israeli that's killed, for every innocent one, there's no way in my mind that she's guilty of anything. She's an elderly woman. Yeah. She's your grandmother. You seem like a nice person. You're not coming with rage or hate towards me. Your parents raised you, and she raised your parents. So I'm sure that she is a good person. And genuinely, I'm sorry for your loss. There's no we may be. From other people, we're enemies. So we can get there. We can get there. So this is where we would diverge. Yeah. So I think Hamas are responsible for initiating the war and leading to the tragic death of your grandma. And I don't like debating on this subject because it's not just too personal. It's a real It's
the core of the subject, and you don't.
And so this is what I'm saying. So you will see it. You will blame the IDF because there was an Israeli soldier that was the Israelis that told her to move into the south, and I would blame Hamas because they invaded Israel and launched the war, and they launched the war from a place they'd fortified Gaza City and turned Gaza City.
You know that we can't talk about this subject without understanding the whole context of the thing.
Yeah.
It's an occupation. People always try to treat this cause, Palestinian Israeli cause, as Hamas, October 7th, whatever, and don't treat it as an occupation. Israel always is trying to delete anything related to Palestine. This flag is not allowed to be presented.
You want to come on camera? Seriously, you're being really eloquent. Come in.
Yeah, no, I think this guy's good for the world to hear. This is a much better conversation, by the way.
You occupy the land first, then you're trying to destroy and delete anything that's related to Palestinian identity and nationality. So, you're now even to the point that you're calling falafel that Israeli, falafel are Israeli and the Hamas are Israeli.
La. Habibi. What do you think the Yahud who lived in Jaffa? What do you think the Yahud who lived in Al-Quds ate? They ate falafel. No, they're not called Arab Jews. We don't call them Arab Jews. We call ourselves Mizrahim.
But all of these are steps into deleting anything that's related to Palestine and Palestinian identity.
So can I respond to that?
Yeah.
So you spoke about an occupation.
Yeah, it's an occupation.
And this is how I see it. In 2005, Israel disengaged from Gaza. It pulled every single Jew out of Gaza, and
it could have been a Singapore, right?
It could have been an opportunity. You can even go back to 48. In 48, if the Palestinians or the Arabs, because they weren't really Palestinian back then, you were there, but you didn't call yourself Palestinian. Not you, but like maybe your grandma or anyone that was alive back then. The Palestinian national identity really came about in the 60s. Aouni Bey Abd al-Hadi said there's no such thing as, to the Peel Commission in 36, there's no such thing as Palestine. Palestine is the word the Zionists invented.
This is a document from my father's brother who had a permit to erect 2 walls. And where? Government of Palestine.
British Mandatory Palestine.
What is this? It's in 1940.
Habibi. So yeah, British Mandatory Palestine, as we both know.
Even further.
Let's go back to
Palestine is derived from the word Palestine, which
comes from the word Palishtim, which is a Hebrew word which means invaders, because they were Greeks who came and established a 5-city pentopolis in Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon. Palishtim means Palestinian.
And the language the pharaohs called it, or whatever, and whatever language is it. At the end, it's in Arabic, it's Philistine or Philistine.
What I'm saying, the Philistines weren't Arabs. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, then they became Arabs.
The Canaanites ceased to exist. Anyway, let's not go back to ancient history.
The Jews they don't belong. They belong to Palestine or any other land.
So what we're saying, just to bring it up. So in 48, if the Arabs had agreed to return, it's my fault because I said the whole thing about Palestine, so I'll ignore that. In 48, if the Arabs had declared independence and there'd been an Arab state alongside a Jewish state, like we could have had 75 years of coexistence. Me and you could be sitting there eating falafel, which you think we stole from you, but alas, we'll ignore that. We could have been eating falafel there. There would have been no conflict. I wouldn't have lost friends and family.
We have already been living there before the British people interfered into
Habibi, in 1844, Jews were the majority.
Muslims have always been living with peace.
The
golden era of the Jewish people. You know, one of the most powerful Muslim rulers was ruling Andalus.
Which one? No, you said
his prime minister was Jewish.
Yeah,
his prime minister.
Yeah.
And you say you need to live in coexistence.
Samuel
We teach you coexistence. You don't teach us coexistence. You Zionists have been killed. My grandfather was kicked out of Asqalan, you call it Ashkelon, whatever, to Gaza, and then from Gaza kicked out everywhere, and people are dying there. And you're trying to tell us coexistence? Jews have only lived with peace under the Muslim ruling.
That's not true.
How is it not true?
It's not true.
They have always been living with.
So we were the Dhimma. It was the Dhimma. We were persecuted. But I don't want to go religious thing because I do this all the time.
Then you say.
So I am a Zionist.
Yeah, it doesn't have.
Zionism literally means I support the. I don't know where you probably don't support a two-state solution. Assalamu alaikum.
I don't support occupation. Two-state solution is an occupation.
25,000. Are you happy?
Yeah.
Let's go, guys. Come on. Let's go.
So.
You happy? 25,000. You happy?
I don't trust Hamas's numbers, but I don't.
Hamas numbers.
Backed by the UN.
But Hamas counts them. You are not in there.
The UN actually backed by UN. But can I?
Even the channels say these numbers.
So they don't. It always says that Hamas Ministry of Health says this.
By the time of By the time of 1947, what happened?
Do you mind being on camera? Or,
yeah. But my
come in.
Okay.
It's all.
I mean, everyone's...
Look at this. This is the closest Jews and Palestinians have been. They're quite cuddly.
So by the time of 1947, about 30% of the land was by Jews and 60% of the land was by Muslims, right? If you go by any democratic country, it would be run by Muslims. They won't be run, or shall I say, it will be. Just keep talking. Okay. Yeah. So basically,
it's a Jewish conspiracy.
So it doesn't have to be run just by Muslims. It just has to be run democratically. Israel won't exist because if there was a vote, the majority would have actually voted against Israel, not pro-Palestine, not pro-Israel. That's the whole point. However, Palestine was illegally occupied by the British, which gave the land to the Jews, and that's the point.
So there's things we agree on. I agree that let's say prior to the 40s, Arabs had a larger population in the land. If you look at the original UN partition plan, it gave actually allocated more land to the Arab state, and I'll show you.
54%.
And the Jews got the worst land as well. Like the Jews got all the Negev. If you're from there, you both know the Negev. It's not that fertile. It's a desert. It's barren. It's rocks and sand. Whereas the fertile land, like of the West Bank, the Judean hills, the Jordan, that was all to the Palestinians or the Arabs back then. I'm kind of agreeing with you. The Arabs had the majority population. There's no argument there. But I'm saying that the land was divided where Jews had larger land ownership and where they had larger populations. The Jews. That's where they drew the lines for the partition. Now, what most people don't understand is British Mandatory Palestine. Sorry for being a bit aggy before. My bad. You weren't pushing me. I know. Now you beamed. Kind of lost my thought then. But yeah, in the partition. Can you remind me where I was? I got distracted.
You were at majority Jewish areas.
Majority was given to the Jews.
Okay.
So I can take it. It's not what was good, but the majority of the land was actually. So the land was divided. It was divided along the population lines of where they were living. I was going to go back to what most people don't know is British Mandatory Palestine, because you brought out a sign of British Mandatory Palestine that actually included a huge region of land. 75% of British Mandatory Palestine was given to the Arabs, and they didn't call it Palestine. Do you know what they called it?
When was this? What year?
This is 1922. They called it the Emirate of Jordan. Jordan used to be part of British mandatory Palestine. No, it's fine. Yeah, you know, like we all know. So basically, the British took, I think, like 19 maybe or 20. They were given the mandate, and they were given the mandate to reference what you said, which was Balfour, the Balfour Declaration. They were given the mandate on the condition they establish a Jewish national home. So the Jews thought they were going to get Jordan, Israel, West Bank, Gaza, and that was going to be the Jewish national home. The first thing the British did was they reneged on that, because basically before that it was the Ottomans, they controlled the land. The British then reneged on the deal and gave most of the land to the Arabs, and the Jews were like, well, what's going on? What's left should be ours, because that's only like 25% of the land. But then you guys as ancestors, 2 seconds, I'll finish the thought and then you can. Your ancestors were like, no chance, mate. We're not dividing this part. This is all about.
What would be the first, sorry to interrupt you, but what would be the first reaction of the British right now if the French come and try to occupy it? What would be the initial reaction? They would want to take out.
There were resistance.
Okay, 1 second. What? Oh. So
you got to look sharp for camera. You can't be having.
No, they would want a resistance, right? So they wanted to take out all of the Jews in the 20s, let's say, right?
Yeah.
But by the time of the 1939, as you said,
yeah,
they encouraged immigration into Palestine, right? And I'm saying this was illegal in the sense of the majority, no matter how to say, 10% or 30%, only up to 30% of the land was occupied by the Jews, or shall I say, were Jewish, and 60% was Muslim, right? So if you actually did the democracy, which is actually, because you're trying to say at that time they didn't have democracy, no. At that time, the British did have democracy, and if they did have democratic vote at that time, there would have been a vote against the rule of Israel, and it would have actually been only a Palestinian land, not a Jewish land.
What year are you talking?
You're talking about even up until 1947.
I think,
even 1947, even by the time of that, the maximum there would have been is 30% Jews, 60% Muslim, and 10% Christian.
Can I ask one question without breaking your flow? You're saying that the British reneged on their promise to the Jews? I've heard that they also reneged on promises they made to the Arabs.
Oh, that happened from 1916.
So,
1916 was
is that true?
Promised Palestine, but in 1917 they promised the Jews Palestine because they played us both.
So is it true that the British reneged on promises to both Arabs and Jews?
Yes.
And that created a large part of the conflict between the British
hate each other. There was no animosity before.
There actually, unfortunately, there was. So from most Muslims I speak to in the past, and particularly most Palestinians, they believe there was like real nice coexistence, and there were definitely some Palestinians that coexisted nicely with Jews, but Jewish travellers who went to the land documented like extreme persecution that the Jews living there faced, and like basically you can take it from like basically throughout most of the Islamic period. But so if you like, for instance, when the Ottomans first took the land in 1517, there were massacres in Hebron. I don't know what you call it, in Al Khalil, and you have massacres in Jaffa in 1517. In like the like throughout history,
I remember when you're talking about, let's say, over how long did the Ottomans rule?
The Ottomans ruled from 1517 until basically
the Muslims ruled approximately for about 1,000 to 1,200 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say there were a lot of, shall I say, relative to that, there was only a minority that was actually. The Jews were actually persecuted by the Muslims. Would you agree on that? It was only a minority of that time.
I would say
majority of that time they lived in peace.
In terms of time, so I think it depended on the Khilafah. So
no, I think the majority. Not like right now. If I tell you right, for most of the time we fought sometimes, but for the majority of the time we actually we lived in peaceful coexistence. You won't accept someone else saying, well, actually, for sometimes we actually fought.
So what I'm saying is, I don't think that's right. I think we can live in coexistence and peaceful.
No,
and I think that no, I'm saying no. I'm saying that there were caliphs. So I can give you an example. So the whole concept of the dhimma, of the people of the book, the dhimmi. So like we give jizya, for example. And I don't like going to have this debate all the time, but for instance, in the Quran, it says that the reason you give the jizya is until you make them sagirun, which is like humiliated, humbled. And so the Jews were always under the Muslim. And now some Muslim leaders were very good to the Jewish people. Other Muslim leaders, like the Almohads, were absolute tyrants who put us to the sword.
They also killed Muslims.
They killed Muslims, exactly. That's what I tell Muslims. That's what I tell them. So when Muslim dies in the park come to me and say like, Jews always had a good under Islam. I was like, Muslims didn't have a good under Islam. So like Jews didn't either.
Sorry to interrupt, but the majority of the time it was Muslims who were actually being good and actually living in peaceful coexistence.
I like being honest. So I've done a lot of studying of Jewish history under Islam, and when I read about Jewish travellers that go in there, it's like 50-50. Sometimes you'll read a traveller who goes to one of the caliphates and he's like, there's like nowhere have the Jews been treated so like well, and they're seen as equal to the Muslims. There's nothing that a Jew can't have in these. And then you'll go to other caliphs, and it will be the complete opposite. They're like they're slaughtering.
You're talking about over 1,200
That's what I'm
years.
saying.
Do you not think people are getting
But anyway,
mistreated?
I agree. I think we agree that Muslim caliphates mistreat both people.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I would say, however, I'm just trying to say it was illegal for the British to give the land of Palestine to the Jews. I'm saying because 60% of the land was actually Muslims, and only 30% of the land was Jews. So if you actually had a democratic, even Jews at that time, most Jews didn't want the actual.
Let me just respond to that.
Sorry, you're saying it was illegal or immoral?
No, illegal in the sense of there was
international law.
In international law, why?
So can I just come back from an Islamic and an international law and a democratic and everything else?
Okay.
The reason that the majority of the Palestinians today are Muslim is because Muslims conquered the land from Christians and it became a Muslim land. And now what you're saying is, if you go by the law of might makes right, kind of like how states are actually born, what happened was that the British defeated the Muslim army, which was the Ottomans. The Ottomans lost the land, and the British, by the Islamic standard, the British were now the new owners of the land, because that's how the Muslim armies expanded and conquered much of land. Most of the world is under Islam, or not most of the world, but a huge proportion of the world are Muslim, because Muslim armies march from Medina all the way to Western Sahara and into Al-Andalus. Now, I'm not making a moral judgment on that because this is different times, it's a long time ago, but the British were the rightful owners of that land. Now, I think the British and the Europeans did something very noble. If you go to any university, they'll tell you how bad the imperialists, the colonialists, etc. But they did something which I think we can probably agree on, is if a people are indigenous to the land, they have a right to govern that land. And so instead of keeping the land for the British, they said, we're going to, and it was not just the British, Europeans in general, we're going to carve up this land and give it to the indigenous people. Now, some of those people can't live together. So if you look at Syria today, Europeans drew a line and said, this is Syria, and it doesn't matter whether you're Shia, Sunni, Yazidi, whatever, you're all now Syrian. And obviously that's good. And so to bring it back to Israel Palestine, you had two people in the land, and there were a lot of both of us.
Force yourself into the land and expect to have.
We didn't force ourselves into the land.
Yes, you did, because what happened? Did we want just Jews to come in and have an Israeli state?
We were already there.
We welcomed you in the time of the Holocaust. Yes,
you didn't. Well, you were murderers at the time of the Holocaust.
No.
In the Holocaust, you murdered it. Haji Min al-Husseini was a Nazi collaborator.
We don't want to go into.
No, I'm just saying the Palestinians were with the Nazis.
No, that's what Netanyahu wants you to believe.
No, I can show you the pictures. I'll show you the pictures.
No, so I'm just.
Haji Min al-Husseini was one of the highest paid Nazi officials.
But initially, when you started saying we want
all
to
the
rule
Palestinians were with
the Palestinian leadership. The Palestinians had two factions. They had the Nashashibis and they had the Husseinis. The Husseinis, which were the more dominant, they were 100% Nazi collaborators.
Okay, was that because they were pressured into collaboration?
Yes, there was a visit into Germany.
No, I mean, he lived in Germany. He set up a radio. He tried to set up death squads.
He couldn't live in
He lived in Berlin. He tried to set up death squads in Albania and Bosnia to murder Jews.
There was no proof of that.
There's loads of proof of that. I can recommend some books.
So to what extent were they like the Vichy in France who collaborated because
No, the opposite. The opposite.
They were active collaborators.
Yes, active collaborators, but 100%.
Is that reasonable that they were active collaborators?
No, at that time, yes, there was a visit between the Husseinis into Germany, but there was no encouragement into anything that the Nazis did. Now, one thing I would want to say is that if right now in any democratic country, if you would actually want to see who would they want to be ruled by and how would they want to be ruled by, they would actually do a democracy at that time. Now, you try to act like the British.
But that's not what the Muslims. That's not Islam.
No. I know what you're trying to say. However, when I'm saying before the Ottomans were actually ruled in 1916, we were actually promised to say by the British, if we actually help us to bring down the Ottomans, you would get your own national rights, right? In 1916. But then after we helped the British to take down the Ottomans, then the British came in and forced themselves into the land and take control of that land. It wasn't just from Ottomans to British. There was that time when we were lied to and we were tricked. Unfortunately, we were too naive, and we were condemned for that. But we were too naive to believe the British or to ever actually believe in our own land. Now, what I'm trying to say is, at the end of the day, in 1947, we actually jumped to that. You can't, at the end of the day, don't expect not to be a conflict, not civilians obviously, but don't expect to not be a conflict when you force yourself into a land. And when hundreds of thousands, about 700 to 800,000 Palestinians were driven out, including my own grandparents were actually driven out.
Where were they from?
Ramle.
So actually, can I say something? Can I say something very important? So usually, whenever I'm debating a Palestinian and they tell me that their family was expelled, I say I don't believe you. But from Lud and Ramle, there were actual. There were. That was two of the. There were two cities that were. Ashkelon. I don't believe they were driven. I think they fled. In Ashkelon, they fled. So in many. So I'll give you an example. In war, people flee war. In Lud and Ramle, there were instructions from the Israeli army. Back then it would have been the Haganah. You have to leave.
Yeah.
Can I ask one question? To help educate me.
Yeah.
As a percentage of the 750,000 people who were displaced, what percentage?